Hello everyone, welcome to my 18th episode of G.GOES Live. Tonight is Wednesday as usual. I'm solo tonight to talk about something really important, and tonight's subject is a topic of choice by my really good friend Hassan Karaki, Cracks. And this guy is one of my really cool friends, best friends, and he always gives me a lot of ideas, a lot of subjects to talk about. And we chose to talk about gear at the studio, how to plug them all in, how to sync them all together, how to give them all the same clock, and maybe have them all communicate together, record at once, jam, etc. So some people, for example, they have MIDI controllers. They can only work inside the box, and some people have, for example, synthesizers or drum machines, sequencers, etc. So they want to kind of sync everything together and jam at once. So all the gear will be communicating together somehow. And of course, you have also the choice of recording your jamming session, or in my case, I'm going to talk about my studio tonight as well, because it's a perfect example. It has a lot of gear going on. So many drum machines, synthesizers, analog stuff, digital stuff, keyboards, sequencers, etc. So I'm going to discuss this. And by the way, let me tell you something, you guys. This is something I think I was dying to learn about a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and here I am now giving it as a summary to you. I will give you all the tips and tricks, all my knowledge, and if you have questions, post them, because at the end of this session I will be going through them one by one. Okay, so first of all, let me tell you about the studio setup that I have here, because this is what we are going to talk about mainly. It might be a very extended setup. That's surely not something you can have at home. This is a professional studio, but if you have some gear at home and you are going to go forward with it, because that's an addiction, by the way. Once you buy a synth, you can never stop, and my friend Fadi Aswad knows that. At one point, you might really be having a collection of gear, whether they are analog or standalone or controllers or anything. So in my case here, I have a lot of analog synthesizers, and I'm going to explain or give brief explanation of the keywords I'm using. I have a lot of analog synthesizers, I have MIDI controllers, I have effect devices, pedals from Moog, for example. I have theremin, synthesizers, digital and analog. I have drum machines, also digital and analog. I have MIDI controllers, many of them, drum pads, keyboards, what else? And a couple of other stuff that are related to patching. I have patch bays, and I'm going to explain what this is all about. I also have a MIDI bay, MIDI patch bay as well, and this is very important. And I will also be going through everything from my analog mixer as well. I don't know if you can see it, and how I plugged everything. It took me like 5 months to plug more than 200 cables, from audio to MIDI to etc. So let me start first of all by explaining some terminologies. Let's start with let's say analog synthesizer. Okay, the synthesizer itself is a sound engine. Okay, you generate a waveform, and this is how you do sound design. You start oscillating a waveform, whether it's a square, a shape, or a triangular, etc. By the way, we had a session on synthesis, so I'm not going deep into synthesis, but an analog synthesizer is a electrical equipment, if I may call it. It's an instrument that works with oscillation. You oscillate an electrical signal. It's a waveform, okay? And then you have, that's called VCO, voltage control oscillator. So it's controlled by voltage, by electricity. When you generate this waveform, you can shape it, you can reshape it, you can also let it pass through a lot of other components in the synthesizer. One of them, for example, is the VCF, which is the voltage controlled filter. This is when you start subtracting some frequencies from the sound. And then of course you can have it pass through envelopes or amplifier, VCA, for example. And many other components. Maybe some of the analog synthesizers, they have onboard analog effects as well, like delay and stuff like that. And some of them are modular. Modular, it means you will have a set of components and you patch things together. You take a sound from one component to another. It's like a wall of synthesizers. And this is when you start getting deeper into sound design. You design a sound that no one else has ever designed, maybe in the entire world, because that's pure creation. Anyway, an analog synthesizer, as I said, some of them are monophonic, some of them are duophonic, some of them are paraphonic, some of them are polyphonic, etc. Those are things that matter in a studio, because you need to know what you're plugging and how you will plug all these things together. So for example, in monophonic synths, you can only play one note on your keyboard. Okay, in duophonic you can play two, polyphonic you can play chords, and in the polyphonic you have a number of voices. We call it number of voices. This is actually by design. So some synthesizers, they have, for example, 4 voices, 6 voices, 8 voices, 16 voices, etc. So you can play 16 notes at the same time, or 4 notes at the same time, etc. So these synthesizers are actually built to be used on stage, for example, or to be used not necessarily with a computer, but you can actually record these things inside your computer. But these things work alone, okay? Though this is an instrument, and the main outputs and main routings you will find on the back of the synthesizer basically are audio output, because actually this is a sound engine, right? So you need to export an audio. There's an audio output left and right, or in the case if it's a monophonic, it will be just one output, etc. And you will have some of them, most of them, you will have something called MIDI in and out, and some of them they have MIDI through. I will discuss MIDI in a minute, but let me finalize more stuff with it. And you have some of the synthesizers, they have something called CV and gate output. This is a control voltage signal. And the gate, basically the gate output is something related to triggering notes on, notes off, okay? And the CV output, it's a control voltage signal, which basically can let an envelope or a modulator in the synthesizer also trigger other synthesizer, okay? So for example, if you have a sound going on positive and negative phases that are linked to, let's say, a filter. The filter is going up and down, for example. That's called modulation. It's like something automatic that's happening inside your synthesizer. I talked a lot, by the way, in previous sessions about these things. If you're interested to know more about it, you can go back in G.GOES Live and watch all the episodes, and you can check the title. The title was, I think, with my friend Elias Stamina, we talked about synthesis in detail. So if you're interested in synthesis, you can go back, or you can apply at Per-vurt. By the way, Elias Stamina is giving a sound design synthesis course, and you can apply for it here. Anyway, so I was talking about CV and gate. Those are other types of ports that you can find on the back of your synthesizer. And basically, CV and gate are a bit old now with MIDI. They do similar stuff, but they are still very useful. And I will explain something like this. I will explain examples, I mean. So what else? You have a lot of other outputs and inputs, but those are the main ones. So in a synthesizer, the main 2 ports I'm interested to talk about tonight are the MIDI port, which can be divided into 3 ports, 3 sections, MIDI in and out and MIDI through, and also the output, the audio output, because at the end of the day, that's a synthesizer generating a sound, and you need this sound to get out of your synth, and you can take it anywhere you want. You can take it to your computer, you can take it to a recording analog also machine, you can take it to an amplifier, etc., etc., etc. So let's start first of all with the concept of MIDI, because I'm really interested to talk about this tonight. The concept of MIDI, basically, what is MIDI? MIDI, 4 letters, M-I-D-I. It's Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And let me tell you some history about MIDI. MIDI was implemented in 1983. It was implemented by Roland and by sequential circuit by, of course, Dave Smith. He's still alive, and he makes very good synthesizers, analog synthesizers, and as I said, by Roland. So it was a test between the Roland JP6 and the Prophet 600, and they started to implement this protocol to let those synthesizers talk together or communicate in a way. So let me tell you what was the problem before 1983. The problem was each brand, they were developing synthesizers and they had their own protocol, their own language. So for example, if you own a synthesizer, you're playing on it, and if you own another synthesizer from another brand, you are playing on it separately. So there is no connection between those two. And why would you need to connect two synthesizers? Don't forget that synthesizers not necessarily come with a keyboard. Okay, some synthesizers are modular, and some synthesizers are just a version of it, which is a rack version. It doesn't have a keyboard, so it's a sound module, sound engine. So what happened here is that some artists, they started to say, okay, we have our synthesizer, but we need a protocol to have one main synthesizer, one main keyboard, through which you can send a signal to many synthesizers. Let's say you have synthesizer, let's call them synthesizer A and synthesizer B and synthesizer C. Okay, you have 3 synthesizers. So what happens here is that if you can actually connect them in a way now so that you can use one main synthesizer, let's call it synthesizer A, and when you're playing the notes on this synthesizer, not only you're triggering the sound of this specific synthesizer, but those notes, like for example, you're playing a bass line or a chord or a melody, they will also be transferred to synthesizer B and synthesizer C, and those notes will be triggering the sound engine of each of those synthesizers. So one main keyboard keybed is going to send out the notes to control 3 different sounds. That was the main purpose out of the implementation of MIDI back in 1983. And of course you had a lot of other purposes, but this is the main thing. They needed a protocol, one protocol, common protocol to communicate, to be able to have all the gear, all the synthesizers with sequencers and drum machines and everything connect together and get synced together somehow. Okay. So back to nowadays. This technology called MIDI, by the way, it's still the same technology till now. We're now in 2017 and we still have the same cable, which is a 5-pin cable, and we still have the same MIDI port, which is the in and out and through, of course. So now I'm interested to discuss the MIDI ports. So what is a port? The port is what you see on the back of this synthesizer or drum machine or sequencer or whatever. A port in MIDI basically is, you have 3 types. You have the in, so that's a MIDI in, and you have a MIDI out, and you have something called MIDI through. That's a THRU, okay? Now, not all the synthesizers have all 3 ports. Some of them, they only have MIDI in and out. Some of them, they have MIDI in and out and through. Some of them, they only have MIDI in. Some of them, they only send MIDI out, etc. But of course, having all 3 ports is very, very important. It's very important for daisy chaining, and that's one topic I'm going to discuss tonight, okay? So, let me tell you an example. Let's go back to our scenario. We have a main synthesizer, okay, that has a keyboard in it, built in. And we have another synthesizer that is only a module. So it's a sound engine with no keyboard built in. Okay, so you can design a certain sound, but you need something to play. You need to trigger the sound. And MIDI message, by the way, is only a message. It's a message. It doesn't hold any audio. So when I say MIDI, I don't mean audio at all. A MIDI is a message that is sent by a controller or by a synthesizer that has a MIDI out, for example. And this MIDI message, it has some information in it. And I will discuss MIDI in detail in a few minutes. So this MIDI message, it travels through this MIDI cable and it goes to another synthesizer through the in port, and it commands this synthesizer and it tells it what to do. And I will also explain what you will have inside this MIDI message. What are those information that are found inside the MIDI message, okay? So now I have a main synthesizer with a keyboard built in, and I have a module on the side. What I want to do, basically, I want to play on my keyboard, on my synthesizer A, let's say, and at the same time, I want to generate the sound from the synthesizer A, and also I want to generate the sound from the synthesizer B on the same melody, same thing I'm writing on my keyboard, I wanted to trigger both synthesizers. So what happens here is I have to connect synthesizer A with synthesizer B. How? By getting a cable going out of synthesizer A that has a keyboard, and that's called a MIDI out, and then I go in the other synthesizer, and in this way, when I'm playing something on the keyboard, synthesizer A, we called it, those same notes will also be transported to synthesizer B that has no keyboard. In this case, let's say synthesizer B is playing a string sound and synthesizer A is playing a piano sound. Now when you play anything on your keyboard, you're going to hear piano and string together going on the same notes. Okay, that's the purpose of MIDI, one of the purposes of MIDI, of course. Okay, so let's go back to the MIDI message itself. It's very important for you to know what's going on in the MIDI message, because this is also important when you want to go deeper into daisy chaining, into chaining multiple devices together. Now we're only on the scenario of synthesizer A and B. Okay, we did not have any synthesizer C for now, but I will add to this scenario. Okay, so what is MIDI message? What do you find in this MIDI message? Let's say I typed on the keyboard, or I pressed the note C, for example, or Do in French. Okay, this note from within the synthesizer itself that has a keyboard, it's going to go to my component of the sound engine, and it will trigger this sound that I was designing, turning those knobs or those modulators or oscillators, etc. I figured out what sound I want to design. Now I want to play it on different notes. So I am triggering different pitches. Okay, so Nabi, I give you a shout out. Flippo Bola. That's my friend Nestor. So this MIDI message, it is actually triggering a pitch in the sound module, okay, in this synthesizer that has the keyboard built in. So for example, I designed a piano sound on this synthesizer, and I want to play a note D. So that's when you press on note D, you will be sending a different message. So that's an exclusive message. It has an exclusive code. So those MIDI messages, they have exclusive codes. If you press on C, you are going to project a code, and if you press on D, you are going to project another code. So the sound engine, when it receives those codes, it knows what to do. So it plays a frequency, for example, on 440 hertz, then it plays a frequency, for example, on 480 hertz, etc. That's when you start playing the sound that you designed already on this synthesizer. On, for example, you have up to 88 keys on your keyboard. Okay. Now, what happens in this case? This note itself that I am pressing on, it's sending up to 3 bytes. Okay. What are those 3 bytes? Let's say I have a MIDI message. It's a message. It's a box. So what do you have in a box? You have 1 status byte, and by the way, a byte is 8 digits, 8 bits. Okay, 8 bits, they form a byte. And how they start, the numbers, those are ones, zeros, and ones. Okay, and how they start, basically, they start and they tell you if they start by, for example, 0, not a 1, it's a status byte. If it starts with 1, it's a data byte, etc. So you have 3 messages inside this box, inside this message, 3 commands, let me say. Okay, the first one, the status, it's telling you, giving you the channel number. Of course, it's telling you what channel you're projecting this MIDI, because in the MIDI chip, each MIDI chip, it has 16 channels of MIDI. Okay, and I will explain this in more detail. And by the way, again, I tell you, I explained this a lot in previous episodes. So you have 16 channels of MIDI, and each channel of MIDI, it has 128, let me say, for example, I call them 128 messages or codes. Okay, so for example, if you are pressing on the note C, the first status byte is telling the synthesizer from which channel it's coming. Okay, and then you have 2 other bytes. One of them is called data byte 1, it holds, for example, the note number. Like this is C on the 3rd octave. So this is also a code, okay? And you also have another data byte, which is called data byte 2. And the data byte 2 actually tells the synthesizer about velocity, for example, or about other things. Like you played the note C, yes, I understand. You're coming from channel 1, I understand. And you're playing the note C, which is Do, for example, I understand. From the 3rd octave, I understand. So I'm going to play this note on this specific pitch, etc. But there's one more question. The module is asking the keyboard, how do you want me to play this note? How hard do you want me to play it? What is the volume of it? Do you want me to play it with a volume of, let's say, level 50 or level 127 or level 100, etc.? Because MIDI, binary, this is in binary bits and bytes, it has 128 values starting by 0. So 0 is a note off, of course. That's the value of the MIDI note. If it's 0, it means you did not press anything. And the velocity values, they start at 1. So it's velocity 1 to 127. So if you're playing a 50, for example, if you're pushing softly on the keyboard, this note will not trigger the sound on a high volume. It will trigger it on, for example, a medium volume. If you push harder like the pianist, you are going to be triggering this same note on the same frequency but on a higher volume. Okay, so that's basically what you find in a MIDI box. A MIDI, I called it a MIDI message box. Okay, you find 3 bytes. One of them is status byte, telling the synthesizer from which channel it's coming. The second one is the data byte 1. It's telling the synthesizer which note to play. And data byte 2, it's telling the synthesizer how to play this note, on which velocity to play it, which volume. Okay. Of course, it's related to notes. We're talking about notes because in MIDI you have so many types of MIDI. We're talking about notes now. When I go to Ableton and controllers, I will be talking about something called CC, okay, which is the control change. That's when you start changing parameters in your DO or whatever. Now, this message called MIDI, it's going out of your synthesizer, okay, that's a MIDI out, and it's going in another synthesizer, that's a MIDI in. So we figured out 2 out of the 3 ports you have in MIDI. You have the MIDI in and out, but you have a through. So what is a through? So let's continue with our scenario. We have a synthesizer A with keyboard built in. Synthesizer B, it has no keyboard, it's only a sound module. And the synthesizer A has a MIDI in and MIDI out. And the synthesizer B has a MIDI in and MIDI out and MIDI through. And now we're adding a synthesizer, which is called synthesizer C, let's say. It has a MIDI in and a MIDI out, let's say, and a MIDI through, for example. Okay, it has all 3 ports. Now, if you want the notes that you played on your main synthesizer, on the synthesizer A, if you want those notes to trigger the sound from A and B, we're done with it. We plugged a MIDI cable from the output of synthesizer A to the input of synthesizer B. That's it. And now, how do you let those notes travel also to the synthesizer C? Now, some of you might think that, okay, it's easy. You plug a cable from the output of synthesizer B to the input of synthesizer C, which is the 3rd. That's a wrong answer, actually, because the notes coming in a synthesizer will not go out of it from the out port, okay? That's when you need the MIDI through. So the MIDI through is giving you a copy of the MIDI in that's coming inside the synthesizer. So what we need to do now is we will plug output of A, input of B, and through of B to what? To input of C. Now we have one main synthesizer with a keyboard. I'm playing certain notes. Those notes are triggering sound from A, sound from B, and sound from C. That's how you connect. That's the very easy way to connect. It's called daisy chaining. Okay, you're chaining synthesizers together. That's a MIDI in and out and through. Now, you might face a problem, for example, when you are linking those 3 synthesizers. If, for example, you don't have a MIDI through on the synthesizer B. Let's say you don't have a MIDI through in it. So what do? This is when you need a MIDI merger or MIDI splitter or whatever. You need something, a device, where you can feed in a MIDI signal, and this signal will be duplicated, a MIDI duplicator sometimes it's called, and it's giving you multiple outputs. So the same copy of the MIDI files are going to be duplicated on multiple ports. And this is how you can start sending the same notes via this device to other devices. But of course, the more gear you start putting on the table, the more risk you will have in lag or latency, or sometimes the MIDI will jam. Okay, there will be much traffic going on. Sometimes you need to restart, by the way. We face something like this in specific scenarios. Okay, so that was a scenario to plug 3 synthesizers, and the list can go on. It's very important to check your ports, because in the case that I listed those 3 synthesizers, 2 of them they had MIDI in and out and through, but if, let's say, only one of them had a through, you need to have it in the middle. Okay, so this is what's going to feed the other synthesizer. So you have to make sure to just study your ports, how many ins and outs and through. Through is very important, that if you don't want to buy this device, which is the duplicator or merger or whatever, you can merge MIDIs together and have them go to one input, etc., etc., etc. So it's all a matter of in and out. It's very easy, believe me, you guys. I spent a lot of time trying to understand this, and then I took a course in MIDI, and apparently this thing is very complex and very complicated at the same time, but it is really easy to understand. You don't have to get into so many details, but that's basically and mainly what you have on the back of the synthesizer. Now, the question is, what if I want to buy more gear? Like, okay, I have 3 synthesizers, we connected them perfectly. I have one central keyboard that's communicating with all. Now you might think of adding a drum machine, okay, not a synthesizer, it's just a drum machine, but it's the same concept. A drum machine also, it has a MIDI in or out and MIDI through. Sometimes it only, some drum machines, they only have MIDI in or MIDI out. Okay, so the big question here you might ask, why would it have a MIDI in? Let's say you have a drum machine, okay, like this Arturia drum brute. You cannot see it now, but I have one here, okay? Or you have a step sequencer. So why would you need a MIDI in to it? Think about it. If you have a drum machine has a step sequencer in it. So you have 16 pads, and when you press play, the steps are playing, and it will read all the elements that are on each step. That's called a step sequencer. So there is a sequence of notes, whether they are kick or snare or hi-hats. That's how a drum machine functions. Okay, so if you have a drum machine and you have the sounds in it already and you're designing the sounds in it, why would you need MIDI in it? It already has the pads, it has the triggers, it has everything in it. Why would I need a MIDI out or a MIDI in to it? Now you have so many reasons, but one of the most reasons, and the most important, I mean, and this is actually the core of this subject tonight, which is sync. This is a sync function. Do you remember we talked about the 3 synthesizer scenario? In the 3 synthesizer scenario, we don't have something called a step sequencer. There is nothing that's playing. You are pushing on notes. That's it. So you don't need something called sync. You're not actually syncing anything. You're playing something, and those notes are traveling to 3 synthesizers. That's very easy. But now when you have a drum machine with a built-in sequencer, a sequencer has a play button. When you play it, it starts going at a certain speed, at a certain tempo. Okay? And when this starts to play, if you're jamming on another sequencer or another drum machine, or maybe you're jamming with a CD player or a DJ set, those things should be synced together. Because when you press play on the sequencer of the drum machine, and that's what Jeff Mills does, by the way. That's what Richie Houghton does. That's what most of the DJs nowadays, they use drum machines with sequencers in them. So you need something to sync those together. Okay, so let's consider you have a synthesizer with an arpeggiator functionality in it. An arpeggiator is also something that is moving. It has a rate, a speed, etc. So when you press on it, it starts generating sequences of notes, and it starts triggering your notes in a certain sequence, or it starts to distribute the notes on octaves, etc. So when you are facing this scenario where you have a sequencer, drum machine, or arpeggiator, you need the synth or the drum machines or everything to be synced together. Okay, so what is sync? Basically, sync, it means when you press play on one of the drum machines, it will send a clock information, a MIDI information, to the other the other synthesizers or drum machines or sequencers, and it will sync up with it on the same tempo. And when you trigger one, the other one will be triggered at the same time. So you don't have to kind of beat match or do the DJ stuff. It's a beautiful technology when you sync everything together, because at one point when you have a lot of gear, when you're performing live, whether in studio or on stage, you need things to be synced. Okay, that's not DJing. So some people, they say, oh, don't use the sync function on the CD player. That's one thing, but this is another thing completely different. Okay, so how do you sync those machines together? This drum machine from Arturia, it has a MIDI, for example, let's say a MIDI in. And you have another drum machine from Roland, let's say, it has a MIDI in and out also. And the Arturia has a MIDI in and out. So let's say you want to play, you like the kick of the 808, for example, the TR8, which is the one beside me here somewhere, this one. But you like the hi-hats and the snares from the drum machine, which is from Arturia, okay, the drum brute. So what you want to do, you want to have them both play at the same time. So you need to have a master and a slave, okay, master and a slave. So what you should do here, you should link them together via MIDI. So you get a cable, a MIDI cable. You plug it from the MIDI output of the TR8, the Roland of one of the drum machines, and then you link the output of the drum machine, the TR8, to the input of the drum machine of Arturia. And in this way, you're sending a clock. A clock, it's like the clock, okay? You're sending a clock that is syncing the other drum machine with it. So when you press play on the sequencer of the TR8, the sequencer of the drum brute will play at the same time and at the same tempo. That's the beauty of it, okay? So you don't have to worry. You just play the master one. By the way, the drum machine could, the drum brute could be the master. You can do it vice versa. You can have a MIDI out and MIDI in on the TR8. It's the same. So, but it won't be the same when you know exactly which one you want to press play on, which one is the central drum machine and the center unit. So in this case, if you also have a MIDI through from the Arturia drum brute, and you have another synthesizer with arpeggiator, let's say, very easy, you can plug the through of the drum brute to the in of the arpeggiator. And in this way, we go back to the first example, it's the same thing. The TR8 is sending a clock to the drum brute. They are synced together, and the same clock that has the information of the tempo and the timing is also sent from the through of the drum brute to the in of the other synthesizer, which we call, let's say, synthesizer F or whatever, okay? So now when you press play on the TR8, the sequence on the drum brute will play at the same tempo and at the same time, and the sequence of the arpeggiator on the synthesizer F, let's say, will also play at the same time and at the same tempo. It's very logical, it's very easy. Now, at this point, you should also know that MIDI has nothing to do with audio, okay? The MIDI signal, the MIDI cable doesn't transfer any audio. The audio is being generated from the sound card of each synthesizer, okay? From the sound engine of the synthesizer or of the drum machine. So you have to plug the cables of audio, jack for example, left and right in case it's a polyphonic or in case it's a stereo synth, to your mixer or to your sound card or wherever you want. So MIDI is something that's related to triggers and messages. and audio is something else. So you have two types of connections. That's why in the beginning of this episode I said it took me 5 months to plug all these gear together, because I had to plug the audio to my patch bay. I will explain the patch bay, to my mixer, to my sound card, to my, okay? And I will explain it, don't worry. So, now you still have a lot of things to consider when it comes to daisy chaining. And this is something, by the way, if you start chaining many synthesizers, like in my case, I have a lot. I have more than 23 synthesizers and drum machines. At some point, you might start to experience some lag or latency in MIDI, and that's really not cool at all. The last thing you want is actually to have a delay or a latency in the sequences of the arpeggiator. It will sound offbeat and it will be a disaster, okay? So my advice to you, when it comes to daisy chaining, just 1 second, you guys. سمعتكم صحة. So when it comes to daisy chaining, the more gear you have, the more risk you will have of latency, and this is something really bad, okay? Now we get into the core of this episode. What's the solution? Especially when you start thinking of integrating digital controllers with your analog gear, okay? What is a digital controller? A MIDI controller, I mean. When you start, for example, let's say you have a computer with Ableton on it, and you also have an Ableton Push 2, a controller by Ableton, which is also this one beside me, okay? And Ableton on the screen, of course. Now, if you have this digital hub, which is the software, the digital audio workstation, that's how it's called, the DAW, the software. If you have Ableton and you have a MIDI controller, and of course you need sound cards and MIDI hub and stuff like that, you can actually let your software take in some MIDI information from you, what you're playing, save them, because those are sequences of note. When you play them live, they are not saved. You play them once and that's it. But you can actually play a sequence of note, like a bass line, and you want this to be repeated, something like this. You don't have to keep on playing the same fucking melody every time. You can actually take those notes inside your DAW in just one fraction of a second. You just play it once, and with the help of a foot pedal or switch or a MIDI controller, you can trigger the record function in Ableton, and it will record those MIDI notes, okay? So you're not actually recording audio, you're recording MIDI notes. And those MIDI notes will be recorded in a clip of 1 bar, for example, or whatever you want. And you can actually send those MIDI notes back to your synthesizer that you were using. Let me give you this example in real life. Let's say you have a synthesizer and you have another synthesizer next to it. You are playing a bass line on synthesizer A, okay? Something like this. But you don't want to keep playing this. You want to play it once, loop it somehow, and move on to the next synthesizer to play something else. You cannot actually do this on the synthesizer unless it has a sampler in it or whatever, or unless you have an analog sampler machine or whatever, or a looper. But it's really old school now and no one uses it. So what you can do, you can send those MIDI information from your synthesizer, those notes, you can send them to Ableton. Of course, in the computer, there is no MIDI port. There is nothing called MIDI port. You need a converter for this. And this converter, actually, it's a MIDI to USB, because that's the only way you can translate this signal from a MIDI to a digital signal the computer can understand, okay? Binary zeros and ones. So you need a device like the MIDI Sport or the 4x4 from M-Audio or from Motu, etc. And you can actually send those notes to a channel in Ableton inside a clip, and those notes will be recorded instantly following a grid, a quantization grid. No human mistake, no human error. It's quantized all the time. And Ableton Push, it has 64 pads. there you go. Your first MIDI bass line is on pad 1. It's illuminated in green, for example. You can change the color, by the way. And now what you can do, if you just press on it, you will be sending this MIDI clip back to your synthesizer. So when you play one time, you remove your hand, what happened is that those notes went to Ableton, they are saved in Ableton, you triggered the pad from your controller, those MIDI went out of Ableton, and they are converted now to, from USB, I mean, to MIDI, and they went in to your synthesizer. So your synthesizer is plugged MIDI out to Ableton through the sound card, of course, or through the MIDI converter, and also your sound card or converter is giving your synthesizer a MIDI in. So this clip is now playing, and you're not touching the synthesizer, but it is playing. Your fingers are on the synth virtually. Okay, so now this is the same bass line you're playing, and now you have time to go to another synthesizer and start playing something else. Let's say you want to add some chords. Okay, you also trigger Ableton to receive those chords from you. You play them once, and you remove your hand from the synthesizer. The chords are sent back from Ableton to your synthesizer, and instead of you touching your synthesizer, playing everything all the time, they are controlled by the first session that you recorded, as in MIDI. So that's something really beautiful, really interesting, and this is what I did in this studio. Everything is going out of Ableton. From Ableton, I can distribute my MIDIs to anywhere I want. And by the way, in Ableton, you can not necessarily to record the MIDIs live from your keyboard. You can just draw them in the piano roll. You can just draw your MIDI notes and send them to any synthesizer. And in the case of the drum machine as well, you can send all the 16, let's say, or 12 or 9, whatever sounds it has. Every single sequence of note, it can also be recorded inside Ableton. Let me tell you an example that I was facing like a month ago. A month ago, I was jamming on the TR-8, and I found myself doing a very, very interesting groove, okay? Like the kick, snare, swings, etc. I was doing a very beautiful drum groove. Now, in the analog stuff, or the standalone stuff, let me call them, you cannot really save a preset. Once you do it, that's it. If you turn off your machine, you reset it, that's it, khalas. You lost the MIDI sequence, you lost the notes, you lost the groove, okay? So what I wanted to do, actually, I wanted to save presets of my grooves. Let's say I was doing disco track, I made a groove of disco, and then the next day I want to make a progressive house track, so I want to change the sequence of bass and the kick and the snares, etc. But what if I want to go back to the disco track? I can't on the machine itself, because it doesn't save a preset. Now actually it does save, but very, very, very few patterns, we call them. So what I wanted to do, I was like, okay, I did my research and everything, and apparently I could send every single element of my drum machine. Basically those are, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I can send every single one, every single sequence. Like for example, if you are writing the kick drum on 4/4, that's a channel on Ableton. It saves the MIDI notes on 4/4, and in the same MIDI clip, you can also export all the MIDI sequences that you produced for this specific track, and they are saved in a MIDI clip. And this MIDI clip is nothing; it's just 5-10 kilobytes. Okay, so when you do this, you are saving your sequences. You can come back to it anytime you want. You can save 100 million sequences in Ableton, and you just need to turn on your drum machine, send any of those sequences, like the disco sequence, for example, send it back to TR-8, and those MIDI notes, they will trigger the TR-8 in the same way you designed maybe a year before. Okay, so that's the beauty of integrating digital with analog. Okay, integrating MIDI controllers with a DAW, digital audio workstation, with standalone gear. Okay, because some of those drum machines are not purely analog, so the word analog might not be correct all the time. Okay, so what you should do in this case, Also, you need to find a way to integrate digital with analog / standalone, okay? And this is also one question, one big question I received from Hassan Karaki, and he was the one who actually told me, why don't you talk about this subject? Because tonight I'm alone and I wanted a topic of choice, and here he was. Thank you, Hassan, by the way. That's something I've always wanted to talk about, and it's really something I really love to explain, because it took me a lot of time to learn about these things, and I'm gonna give it to you in 1 hour or whatever. So anyway, how to integrate digital with analog / standalone gear in the studio or live on stage or anywhere you want. So let me tell you something about the software itself before, because I talked a lot about standalone analog stuff, but I didn't talk about Ableton. Ableton is a digital audio workstation, so it's like an emulator of an endless maybe the endless number of gear, mixer, etc. So it is a software with unlimited options, unlimited possibilities, okay? You can have unlimited number of clips with unlimited number of MIDI sequences, notes, etc. Now, when you work inside the box, inside Ableton, if you have the suite, for example, you can have unlimited number of channels, MIDI and audio, and you can have unlimited number of clips, of course, and maybe you can have only 256 channels, but that's close to being unlimited anyway. But let me tell you something about Ableton, what you can do with the controller push. Let's say you have a 64 pads pattern, and that's maybe 20% of the capability of the push itself, okay? What you can do with it, you can actually control your sequences of notes, and we call this a session. You have a session, you prepare it, for example, and you can pre-record all your MIDIs or audio as well. You can record the audio and MIDI, and when you are on stage or in the studio, of course, you can just push on buttons. That's what I call push, Ableton push. You push on a button and you launch a clip. Again, that's only 20% of the purpose of push, but it can do way more than this. But if you are on stage and you have, for example, a track grouped in a certain scene, this is called a track X, for example, and you have a clip called bassline 1, bassline 2, melody 1, melody 2, drum 1, TR for the TR8, drum 1 for the, for example, for the drum brute, and maybe you have a pad for, let's say, your Korg Minilog, okay? Because you prepared this before, you jammed in the studio, you recorded your MIDI sequences, you recorded your patches, your presets and everything. And when you are there with the Ableton push, you are now a controller, okay? So when you send those information, when you send your own melodies and bass lines, you send them out of the computer to your synthesizers and drum machines, what you actually do is you spend your time tweaking the sound. Let's say the bass line is playing on a with a, for example, with a low pass on, let's say 200 hertz. And when you want to make something uplifting, let's say something with a crazy effect, you can turn the knob of the filter on the sequence, on the synthesizer itself, because that's where the sound is coming out from. It has the filter on it, the VCF, and you can tweak the sound. You can open the filter. You can have your low pass on maybe 500 hertz, and this is when you get more high frequency and mid frequency, okay? So you spend your time tweaking the sound, redesigning the sound, reshaping the sound on the spot, and you also have complete control on when to stop some clips and when to trigger some clips. Let's say you want to stop the bass line now, you just push on the clip that is on one of those 64 pads on push, and the bass line will stop. If you want to launch 5 clips together at the same time, you just push on them 5, and they will be sent to your 5 different synthesizers, and you will have 5 sounds working together. You don't have 5 hands, you have 2 hands, but with 10 fingers you can control hundreds of thousands of sounds, presets, program changes, etc., etc., etc. So you will be a performer controlling things live on stage. And the most important thing for you to understand is that you can still be playing something physically. Like, for example, you don't want Ableton to send this MIDI clip to your synthesizer. You want to play it manually. You can still do that. Okay? So, I think I talked a lot about the daisy chaining, Ableton integration, okay? And it's not because I'm the exclusive dealer of Ableton that I'm talking about Ableton, but really, believe me guys, Ableton is patented with this technology. There is no other software that can do this. It's called Ableton Live, okay? And with the Push, which is the most advanced controller ever built for Push nowadays, you can do crazy things, not only launching stuff, you can sequence drums as well, you can send drums to a drum machine, you can play melodies, you can lock yourself in a key, for example, and Ableton will turn off the wrong notes and it will illuminate the correct notes, and any note you press, you will be harmonic in key. So you have so many things going on nowadays with technology, and I am allocating a lot of time, and we're actually shooting now, it's kind of behind the scene, we're shooting a lot of stuff about Push and some of the native instrument controllers as well, the MIDI controllers, which is the one here beside me, behind me or beside me, whatever it is. And this keyboard can give you a LED light on the correct notes. It can turn off the wrong notes, and here you are. If you don't know anything about music theory, it's not a problem anymore, because technology is there to help you. And I'm also here to help you discover about music theory for computer research. This is the best course I give, and I'm sure many of my students now are watching, and they were just, it's mind-blowing, and they were like shocked on how in 5-6 sessions they learn how to do counterpoint, how to do chord progression, and how to do bass line, how to do melodies. I advise anyone to take this course. It's a course I developed. I'm not a musician. I was into this problem of discovering this for maybe 20 years. It was like a dream for me to just know the secret of notation without going into solfege and stuff like that. And I did it, and I developed a course called Music Theory for Computer Musician with the use of technology. Of course, you can be a Beethoven without learning in the conservatoire for years and years. So enough promotion for the course. Let me go back to the topic. Hassan asked me also, he said I have some gear he bought from here, and he wants to sync them up together. So let me tell you what he has actually. Hassan has a TR09 or TB, let me check, because I took those questions today. He said, I have a TB03 from Roland, which is the baseline synthesizer. He has the Korg Minilog. It's also a synthesizer, which I have also here. And he has the Per-vurt from Arturia, which is the drum machine I have also over here. It's a nice setup, Hassan. So he says, in addition to controlling everything using KeyStep and Akai APC Mini, he also bought them from here. The Arturia KeyStep is a small controller. It's a small MIDI controller. It functions, it operates also via MIDI and USB. And by the way, I forgot to tell you guys, in 1999, MIDI was implemented through USB as well. So not only you can transfer MIDI via the 5-pin cable, but you can also transfer MIDI through a USB cable nowadays. And most of the MIDI controllers nowadays, if not all of them, some of them, they don't have MIDI in and out. It's just a USB cable, but this USB cable is already transmitting the MIDI signal. So Hassan is asking, what's the best way to connect the following gear: TB03, Korg Minilog, and Per-vurt, 2 synthesizer and a drum machine. And he said, I also have a KeyStep, which is a keyboard controller, and an Akai APC Mini, which is a bit similar to the Ableton Push. Okay. Now, Hassan, my ultimate goal is to have a jam-ready setup for live recording and eventually for production. Okay, it's very easy. I talked about it. If you have a TB03 and a Korg Minilog and a Per-vurt, the first thing you need to think about is syncing them together. Why? Because the Korg Minilog has a sequencer in it. The Per-vurt is sequence-based. Of course, it has a sequencer. And the TB03 is also, it has a sequencer in it. So you have 3 sequencers, Hassan. And that's what I love. Okay? Now, if you have the 3 machines together, or let's say each one you're playing on each one individually. You can't actually use the sequencers unless you are a robotic DJ, and which is impossible. You can reach 99% of being a robot as a human being, but there is this 1% that will fuck up the sync and your mix maybe after 5, 6 phrases or 2, 3 bars, etc. It depends on how much the mistake is far away from the grid. Anyway, so you need to plug your TB03 and Korg Minilog and Drum-Brute to have them all sync together. Now you have so many ways of doing this. And Hassan also bought recently a MIDI Sport 4x4. This is a 4-in 4-out MIDI device to USB, okay? So let me tell you, ya Hassan, how to plug these things. First of all, Hassan wants to use the computer because he has an APC Mini, and APC Mini doesn't function but with a computer, with Ableton of course, and the KeyStep can function with both, can function with analog gear, standalone gear, or it can also function with Ableton. My advice to you, Hassan, since you also want to record these things inside Ableton, my advice is to let Ableton control your clock, okay? Not do daisy chaining. That's my advice, okay? You can let Ableton send out a clock signal to your gear, and by that you can actually have all your synthesizers and drum machines synced together. Now, how to do that? You have also so many ways of doing this inside Ableton. The easiest way possible, since you have the 4x4 M Audio MIDI Sport 4-in 4-out, is to actually, you have 4 independent ports of output and 4 independent port of input. So actually what you have, you don't have a clash, you have 4 times 16 channels. So you have 64 channels of MIDI already in and in out. So let me tell you how to do it. First of all, your APC Mini or APC, you have an APC Mini. Your APC Mini is controlling Ableton Session, okay? And this is designed to do that. You have 64 pads and you have 8 faders, okay? Now, your APC 20, basically you will use it to launch clips, whether they are audio clips or whether they are MIDI clips. Actually, you're going to launch both, okay? But what happens here is that, let's say you prepared your MIDI sequences. You are drawing them using the sequencer of Ableton, or maybe you exported some sequence from the Korg Minilog itself to your Ableton. How to do that? You can plug your TB03 and you can plug your Korg Minilog and Drum-Brute separately, of course. You can plug the MIDI out of them to the MIDI in of your 4x4 machine. And also you can plug the MIDI out of the 4x4 to, you need 3, of course, 3 MIDI out, because you have 3 machines, TB3, Korg Minilog and Drum-Brute. You plug those from output from the 4x4 to input of each of those gear. So what you have now, actually, your ins and outs of those 3 machines are ready. So in Ableton, you can receive MIDI information from those machines, and you can also send the MIDI information to those machines, okay? So let's say, for example, you have a sequence of bass. You are drawing this on Ableton, okay? And you created a clip called Bass 101, let's say. But you want those notes to go to your TB03, because TB03 is a bass synthesizer. You only have to press on your APC Mini. You press on the Bass 101 clip, let's say. And from the channel where this bass is, you need to do the channel configuration. And that's what you should learn about, basically. If you're using Ableton, you should know how to do the routing, the I/O, inputs and outputs. In each channel in Ableton, you have input and you have output, whether the channel is audio or whether it is MIDI. So if it's audio, it asks you, where are you taking the audio from? And where are you sending the audio? And by default, you're sending it to the master channel of Ableton. That's audio. We're not talking about audio now. And in MIDI, it's the same thing. You are, it asks you, the channel, where do you want this channel to receive MIDI from? And where do you want this channel to send your MIDI clip to? Okay? Now, you can send your bass clip, the 101 bass clip. You click on your MIDI out of the channel configuration because you want to tell Ableton where you want those MIDI clips in this MIDI files in this MIDI clip to be sent to. And you will find actually in the MIDI 2, that's a MIDI out, you will find the 4x4 device because you have a driver installed. So that's a device. When you click on it, right under the drop down menu, you will find all 4 ports. Port 1, port 2, port 3, port 4. So look at your bass TB03, the synthesizer. Where is it plugged? It's plugged, let's say, on port number 3. So you tell your channel in Ableton, send this 101 clip to port 3 on my MIDI device, which is called the 4x4. And when the MIDI device receives this MIDI clip, it will send it to what? To the input of the TB03. Those notes will trigger the sound engine of the TB303, and from the other side of this device you have an audio output. The sound, this acid sound, will go as audio from a cable, an audio cable, to wherever you want. And by the way, you can go back to Ableton, of course. You can take this audio back to your sound card and you open a channel in Ableton. You tell this channel, take the audio from my sound card, port 1/2, for example, or in this case it's 1 because it's a mono. Take the audio from this specific device called the TB03. So now when you're sending through the APC Mini, you're sending the clip to the TB03. Those notes are triggering the sound, and the sound from the TB03 is going back to what? To Ableton channel audio called recorded bass, let's say. And now you have both MIDI and you have audio. How beautiful is that? And what you can do now, you can use this audio clip to, of course, to produce music, or you can use this MIDI clip for future reference if you want to jam, or you can also use the audio version of it because you have it. You have the audio clip and you have the MIDI clip, so now you're free to use whatever you want. But what's the benefit of having the MIDI clip? You can send the same notes, same bass notes sequence to another, to the mini log, because you have a mini log, and you can trigger other bass sound. Okay, and you can also have a layering of bass. You can have 2 bass lines. It's very, very simple. Okay, it's very maybe I was simple explaining this, and that's why my students love me all the time. Okay, so Hassan, we still have the key step. The key step is very important for it to be the central MIDI keyboard, because the key step, it has a lot of MIDI options. It has arpeggiator, it has chord learn, it has a lot of things going on it. And you can use the key step. Let's say you don't want to integrate anything from your synthesizer. You just want to open Ableton and start jamming, playing on a VSTI, on a virtual studio technology instrument. You're not using the mini log, you're not using the DP3, you're not using the drum brute. Okay, so this key step, not only it controls your VSTI, but it can also control your analog gear. You can directly play on the TB03 because the TB03 doesn't have a keyboard. You can play a bass line on your key step. The notes, they go to Ableton, and they go back from Ableton to wherever you want. So through the MIDI in and out channel, you can send those notes to wherever you want. And if you would like to use the key step to control your TB03 directly without going through Ableton, you can still do that, because this specific keyboard controller has a MIDI output. So you can directly connect MIDI out to MIDI in of your TB03. Now, since your key step has also some functionalities in MIDI, like you have chorder and arpeggiator, it's stuff like that, you can use it as your central keyboard to send data, MIDI data information from it to wherever you want. Okay, so what about your drum brute, your drum machine? Your drum machine, the drum brute itself, it's a pure analog drum machine. You can actually use it to sync it with whatever sequences you're you're giving it. So for example, you are sending your MIDI clips to the TB03. That's already synced, okay? That's already following the clock of Ableton. You don't have to worry. And you're sending some information also, other MIDI clips from Ableton on a different channel to Minilog. That's also synced already, because each channel is sending through an independent port on your 4x4. Both of them are sending the same clock in Ableton. Now the problem is with your drum-brute. How can your drum-brute be synced? Because the drum-brute has a play function. You're not sending a MIDI clip to it. Okay? You're producing the sequences on it directly. So you're layering out your drum elements, and you want to press play on the drum-brute for it to be synced with your bass line that is getting the MIDI notes from Ableton, and from the Minilog that's also getting the notes from Ableton. And this is when you need to send a clock to your drum-brute from Ableton or from any of the gear that you have next to it. So now you have the choice. If you already have an extra port on your 4x4, which is your case, because you only use 3 so far, right? Actually, you only use 2. You only use 2, the TB03 and the Minilog. And now you can have an output from your 4x4 MIDI to in for the drum machine. And with a very simple configuration from inside Ableton preferences, you can send a clock to this drum machine. And if you don't want to do it through Ableton, it's very easy. You can plug a MIDI output from your TB03, okay, to the MIDI input of your drum machine. So when your TB03 receives this MIDI clip from Ableton, it will also send the clock information to your drum machine. Okay. Now, there's one thing I have to add. Not this specific solution doesn't happen with all synthesizers. In 90% of the synthesizers, because of so many factors. I'm not going to get too detailed with this. Okay, the channel number and how many, etc. So it's very simple. It's very straightforward. When you understand the ports, the in and out and through and all these things, you can understand how to plug these things together. You can sync your machines directly from Ableton, which is for me the best solution, because I already have 3 units of Motu 8x8. So I have 128 times 3 independent MIDI channels. So I have enough outs and ins to sync all my gear through Ableton, because in Ableton, when you click on master play or scene play, you launch many clips at the same time. Those clips are going to get inside your synthesizers with no delay, with nothing. Okay, this is, in my opinion, in my experience, way better than daisy chaining, way better than chaining out in from synthesizers themselves. Okay, now of course you have some risks with this as well, but if you come to my studio and you take a look on how I plugged these things together, how I synced everything together, you will find most of my synthesizers and drum machines are plugged directly via Ableton, via my Motu MIDI hub, and some of them are feeding each other. Some of them are daisy chained. Okay, like for example, in the case of my Roland Ira series, okay, I have 3 of them that are chained together, because I know that when I press a sequence on one, I want the second and the third to play at the same time. So when I press it manually, I have a small cable, just 30 centimeter cable, going from output of one to input of the second, going from output of the second to input of the third. So those 3 are synced together already. I don't have to have a long cable going to my computer via my Motu, etc., etc., etc. So in this specific situation, because I want them to play all the time together, I did this. And when I press play on one of them, or I feed it in with a MIDI clip from Ableton, this MIDI trigger will trigger the second and the third synthesizer. So it's up to you. It's completely up to you. You have to know exactly what you're doing, okay? And I think I explained these things in too detail. My students are going to kill me for that, by the way, because they're paying for this. And here I am now giving this information for free, because I love education and I love the show and I love you sending me questions all the time. I have a lot of people that are with me all the time. We still have some questions. I will go through questions in the last 15 minutes, but I still have to tell you one thing about Patch Bay. Patch Bay is maybe I will do a G.GOES live session on Patch Bay, but some of my friends, he was like, please talk about Patch Bay and how you plug these things to the mix, because he was here with me checking how I was always under the table linking things together to my Patch Bay. A Patch Bay actually is a rack. You search it on Google, because I cannot let you see it. It's really here under the mixer. It's a 42, for example, ports. Okay, it's very simple. It doesn't. It's not plugged to electricity. Nothing. It's just jack inputs and the same jack inputs from the other side. So it's like you link all your gear to it. Okay, from the back panel of it. And from the front panel, you need just small cables, very small cables. I don't know if I have some here. I have them all in the basket of cables, but you need just one small cable to patch things from the front panel. For example, if you want the synthesizer, the Matrix Brute, to go to your sound card, you just need a small cable to route the port of the Matrix that is linked from the back panel. So from the front panel, you patch it to the mixer, for example, or the sound card on the Patch Bay, because the sound card or the mixer is also connected to the back panel of the Patch Bay. So everything is connected to the back panel of the Patch Bay, and you just need to route things. Okay, so it's like you go to this and you go to that, etc. It's very small cable, 30 centimeters cable. You can take things out instead of going to the back of the synthesizer, unplug it and take another cable, go to another place and plug it in the mixer rather than in the sound card, for example. You just don't need to do that. You just plug everything to the Patch Bay, and whatever you want to route, you just route from the front panel. You take this to that, in to out, always it's out to in, or etc. Okay, so that's a Patch Bay. I promise, I will talk about Patch Bay, and the same thing goes for the MIDI Bay. Okay, I plugged every single in and out in my studio to this MIDI Patch Bay or MIDI Bay, and now from Ableton I can send anything to anything. I can send a MIDI file, a MIDI clip to my Moog, and the same MIDI clip I can send it at the same time to my ARP Odyssey, and I can go to another channel in Ableton, create a MIDI chord, for example, and send it to my Nord Lead 4. And all of these things are also connected via audio to my sound card or to my Patch Bay or to my mixer. They are all connected now together, and they are all synced together because I chose the best way, which is connecting directly to my DAW. So my DAW is giving the clock to every single synthesizer, not themselves connected together via daisy chaining, because some of them, they don't have a MIDI through. Some of them, maybe you don't want this to give that, or you don't want that to give the other, etc. In Ableton, when you have everything connected to this MIDI device called, for example, the 4x4 that Hassan took, or mine, like the Motu 128, you have 8 in, 8 out. I have 4 pieces of these. I have 8, 8, 8, 8 ins and 8, 8, 8, 8 outs. So every single MIDI port is connected to this, and those are connected via USB to my computer. So from my computer, I can send anything anywhere I want, and I can receive anything anytime I want. At the same time, the audio being triggered is connected to my Patch Bay and mixer and sound card. I can take everything in Ableton and I can produce now in an easy way. So that was it, you guys. I love you so much, but I'm too tired. I talked a lot and I enjoyed every single second of this episode. I told Hassan this will be one of my most interesting episode. But as I promised, I will go through your messages. So please, if you have any message, you write it now, because I'm allocating the last 15 minutes to read your messages. So let's see. We have, by the way, we have Ryan Akiki, who's always with me on the show. Thank you, Ryan. He already asked me how to sync Ableton with Traktor. Ryan, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, by the way, because it's very simple nowadays with the new technology Ableton came up with. It's also integrated by most of the applications and most of the softwares. It's called Link, Ableton Link, okay? So this is like a protocol, a new protocol, like they did with MIDI. They did something with Ableton, and it's called Link. And this is something that sends clock via network, okay? So it could be wireless, or it could be any network, wireless network, or cable, or whatever. You can connect applications together. You can connect software together, and you can connect, for example, if you have if you're working on Ableton on your laptop, and I have my iPhone with an iMachine application, I can connect to the same network, same Wi-Fi, okay, and I can press on Link, because Link is integrated in all those applications nowadays, and I will join you. I will follow your clock. So when I press play, you will play also at the same tempo, at the same time. So we will be synced. And if we have someone like our neighbor on the 3rd floor and he's connected to the same Wi-Fi, he can join us from his computer, and we can all jam at the same time. He can be he will be using, for example, a Traktor. I will be using an application on my iPhone, and you will be using Ableton on your laptop. So we are all jamming at the same time, same sequence, same time, same clock, same everything. It's very, very, very interesting. And what I do at the school, by the way, here at one of the sessions, we have 4 stations. You cannot see them now, it's behind the camera. 4 stations, and they are all connected on the same network. And one of the projects that we do as a homework, actually a technical session, the students, they should work together. So they link all the computers together through one click only, because everything is linked already to my network, and they just press on Link, and all the 4 computers are linked together. So station 1 is doing a bass line, station 2 is doing drums, station 3 is doing chords, station 4 is doing melody. And when one of them plays the project, all of them will follow the same sequencer, the same timeline, the same BPM, the same everything. It's really cool. But I will tell you another thing, Ryan. You can actually sync Ableton with Traktor via clock, internal clock. And this is something, it's old school now since we have Link, but you can still do it. In every one of the software will be slave and one will be master. This is what James Zabila does, by the way. You can use Ableton, for example, as a main effect hub, and you can launch clips on the fly while you're playing on Traktor on 4 decks. So everything is synced. When you play on Traktor, the first deck, for example, if Traktor is the master, then basically you should have Ableton as a master. When you launch a clip in Ableton, Traktor will follow the same tempo and will follow the same timeline. It will follow the same sequence, same everything. So when you play something on Traktor, Ableton is moving with it in sync mode, and all the decks will be in sync. All the sequences in Traktor will be in sync. All your remix decks will be in sync, and that's how you do it. So it's a matter of configuration. It's very easy to do. You have to assign Ableton to be in master mode, it's sending a clock signal, and that's when you do it in the preferences, in the link preferences, MIDI and link preferences. And in Traktor, of course, you can go to the MIDI clock preferences and set it to receive a MIDI clock from Ableton. And it used to be complicated, but nowadays with Link, it's much easier. Third thing for you, Ryan, if you, for example, want to sync Ableton with another software called, let's say, Reason, okay, or Logic or whatever, you can still do that by actually doing something called Rewire. Okay, Rewire is the same concept also. You can let channels from Reason. This is how I started with Ableton anyway. I used to use Reason before, but Reason doesn't support VSTI from before. So I wanted to use some effect processors in Ableton. I used to send the channels from Reason to separate channels in Ableton, and they are all synced together. The audio coming out of Reason is slaved. It's going through Ableton. I use the effects of Ableton, and when I render, I will be rendering from Ableton. So that's my answer to you, Ryan. I hope you got what you wanted, and let's see who joined and who asked me questions. I have to give a shout out to my very close friend as well, but online, close online, and I finally know how to spell his name now. Sylvain Klaus SG. This is one of the greatest producers. Actually, I've really been following this guy, and he does really good music. He's on Stayoki now, and we used to, share promos, etc. Sylvain, thank you so much. He's saying, but do you know why Ableton shows the Motu as port 1, 1, 1, 2, etc. instead of show the hardware name like in Cubase? That I assume that the info from the MIDI configuration from the Mac. Asking this as I have also 4 Motu units, and I hate to have to find what is Motu 3, 4, etc., etc., etc. Well, Sylvain, you're right. You're right. In my case, I have it in the same way. But what I did, to be honest with you, I was testing because they always take the same name. Okay, they always take the same name. So I tested it only once, and I have a sticker on one of the Motus. This is Motu 1, Motu 2, Motu 3, 4, etc. And now I know which one is plugged where, etc., etc., etc. But I saw online that there was a firmware update, and it solved this, because in the software that you can download with the Motu, you can actually I think I forgot what was the name of it. You can actually name your device, and when you name your device, you might see it. Okay. Sylvain, thank you so much. So let's go with other people. Some of them are sending hi. Vanessa Bitar, I love you too. Hilal Aridi, Hassan Rasmi, big heart to you. Hassan Rasmi is an Egyptian friend, very talented producer. You should check his tracks on Per-vurt as well, Per-vurt Records. He's supported by Nick Warren, Hernan Cataneo, everybody. This guy is a genius. I brought him in the past to Lebanon 2 times, I think, and we've been friends since then. He's very talented. Now he has an EP on Per-vurt called Pulsar, and this EP is massive. Hassan, shout out to you. Samer Dabul, love you, man. Khalid Farhat, I remember this when G explained it to me at Per-vurt school. Yes, Khalid, you were an excellent student. Roland, Fadi, Azra, which is better, FL Studio or Ableton? Well, Fadi, of course, Ableton. I can't say much. Juju, I love you too. Firas Akum, Hola, Champ, etc., etc. I'm really sorry if I miss any of your questions. This is all I can see. So if you have any questions, please send them now. I still have a few more minutes. It's already 1 hour and a half, but I always enjoy being with you guys when I'm solo. And I also love this interaction. I'm here. If you have some questions, I'm staying for the next 3 minutes. Otherwise, I will have to say thank you, first of all, and good night in a minute, of course. So, thanks for the tips, Sylvain. Thank you for joining always. And by the way, a shout out for you. It's for the 10th time, I think, I'm inviting you to be an artist on my label. I really love your music, and some of your tracks really changed some aspects of how I see things in life, and you've been really you've really been indirectly a trigger and an influence to really how I envision things. And it's all about music, man. It's all about music. Thank you for playing those notes and melodies, and thank you for reaching out to the universe. It brought you to me through promo, and I got your messages from the sounds that you're always, your sounds, they scream, man, and I really love them. I always play your tracks on my Proton show as well, and I'm really I would be very happy if you sign an EP on Per-vurt. So I think we don't have any more questions. I think it's time for me to say goodbye to you. But before I do that, let me tell you who's going to be with me next week. Next week I will have one really very talented guy. I met him a long time ago, and I followed his career since then. This guy is taking really taking care of the scene now when it comes to hip-hop and this style. And he's managing, and he's also an owner of some clubs in Lebanon, and we are going to talk a lot about a new way of mixing. We talk about his experience and his production, also tips and tricks on how he DJs. This guy is Jack Sleeman, and he will be with me next week. So if you have questions for him, you can also post them on my Facebook or send them as messages. So you guys, I don't have questions from you. I allocated the last 15 minutes to answer you, but unfortunately I am out of time. It's 1 hour 30. Thank you so much for being here with me every Wednesday. Thanks to everyone who posted questions, and I hope I answered all of you. And I promise, if there was some if there's any question I couldn't see, I promise I will go through them again and write you a private comment. Thanks again for watching. See you next week with Jack Sleeman. Until then, be safe, be good. Salute.